welcome back to Phillip Island. I was coming down here for an astrophotography workshop, but as you can see, there's 100% cloud cover, so that's not going to be much use this evening. But I thought I'd come down anyway, because it's been a few months since I've been here. It's one of my favourite places in Australia, and it gave me the opportunity this morning to get out and look at how to take photographs when the light isn't with you, the conditions aren't with you, it's not really windy enough to get really big waves crashing over rocks and so on. It's completely dull, flat, grey sky, so there's no great light conditions. The tide is against me. I normally try and shoot low tide at sunrise and sunset. At the moment, high tide exactly coincides with sunrise and sunset, so I'm not able to do that. So instead I've come down here to Pyramid Rock, where the tide doesn't matter because I can get up high. The lookout here is about 40 metres above the ocean, and I can take some wide angle shots of Pyramid Rock in the background, these basalt cliffs in front of me, and just try and frame up some shapes, and then put some neutral density filters on to really slow the shutter speed down, so I have a very long exposure that enhances just the shapes. The sky is pretty dull, there's nothing happening with it anyway, so I'm hoping I can get a really sort of interesting abstract shot here. So I'm going to set up and let's see what we get. Okay, I'm using an app on my phone called ND Timer, which just reduces the need to do multiple arithmetic calculations. So I've set the exposure to 1/200th of a second. I've set 16 stops worth of filter, which means I can put a 10 stop and a 6 stop filter on, and that gives me an exposure of 5 minutes and 27 seconds. So I'm going to need to use my remote. There's two options here, depending on which sort of remote you have. If you've got a remote where you can set the exposure time directly, you can set it on here and then just click the button and it will take that exposure and then shut down when it's finished. Alternatively, you can use a timer or a watch and you click the button, put it on hold, or set your camera to first click is open the shutter, second click is close the shutter, and then use the timer to tell you when to turn it off. So let's give it a go. So that's just got over 5 minutes to run now. So I'm just going to let that go, and then it'll run another 5.5 minutes to do a dark exposure, which is used to reduce the noise. On very long exposures, the noise that you get on the sensor is exaggerated, and so it's useful to, if you've got the ability in your camera to take another exposure with the shutter closed, and the camera then automatically subtracts any hot spots that it finds in the second exposure from the first exposure, so that it reduces the noise. Long exposure photography is really interesting from the point of view of getting an image that your eye simply can't see, and so you're sort of guessing as to what it's going to look like. With a bit of practice you can start to predict, but the other joy of it is you just get to hang around and watch the world. It's such a beautiful spot here that it'd almost be worth coming down here without a camera.
This is the composition that I settled on. The horizontal shot had just a bit too much of an imbalance between this big block of detailed cliff face on the right hand side in comparison with not very much going on the open sea on the left-hand side. By switching the camera to vertical, it allowed me to have this big triangular cliff with this detailed columnar basalt in the foreground, balanced by the pyramid and the beautiful pink rocks in the background. At 1/25th of a second though, there's just not much going on. There's not enough wave action crashing over rocks to make this foreground or the background interesting. So I slowed the shutter down, and this is shot at 20 seconds, but this is still just a bit dull and washed out, but there's just too much texture in the water here. There's some very nice texture around here, which adds some interest, but around here it's just sort of boring. So I slowed this down even further by putting some extra neutral density filters on, and this is now 150 seconds, 2.5 minutes. And I was lucky when I took this shot because the sky just brightened a little bit, which gave the colours just a little bit more snap. And I was quite happy with this. So when I finished the processing of this, it's come up quite nice. But I thought, let's have a look at what this looks like in black and white, just as a comparison. And the black and white, unfortunately, takes a little bit of the snap away because there's too much of the same tones in the greens on this foreground cliff face and the greens on the pyramid with the pink rocks here. But I thought, what would happen if we sepia tone this? And that pops it really nicely. So I'm going to put those three up side by side, and you tell me which one you prefer.